Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of the sessions organized by Urgency. We're the global community supported agriculture network made up of national networks from all over the world. And we have a really great panel here today. We have 3 continents represented and a really interesting subject, which is community supported agriculture and food justice. And the 3 panelists are Kiana Mickey, who is live from New York right now. Hi, Kiana.
Hi.
Veiko Heinz, who is from the Solavi network in Germany, who is muted. And Ariel Molina, who is coming to us live from the Amazon, from Manaus. And they are all members of Urgency's International Committee, as well as being very active in their countries. So this is quite a short session. The concept of food justice is really something very key, I think, today in the context of the economic crisis that's been caused by COVID, and also in terms of all the social and economic inequities that exist. And it's one of the issues linked to the right to food that Urgency has been very deeply dedicated to. So I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask you all. Maybe I can start with something that's a little provocative here. People often consider that community supported agriculture is a middle class yuppie phenomenon. Do you really think that's a justified reputation, or is there more to it than that? Who'd like to start? Veiko, please do go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Judith. Yes, I think that's an interesting question. And in general, I think we can say it is, but in the same way, it's not, I think. So for sure, in generally, you can say community-supported agriculture is encompasses a group of middle-class liberal projects and a more modern, intellectual, individual, cosmopolitic-oriented phenomenon. But in the same way, I think it's much more diverse. It's far beyond that. And that's a relevant thing, I think. It's more inclusively, and it incorporates very, very different and heterogenic social groups and different political backgrounds. I think this is important. So we can characterize social groups and milieus in detail by their morals, values, mentalities. And I think community-supported agriculture encompasses very, very traditional conservative lower and upper middle class, as well as social ecological middle class, liberal intellectual upper class, also creative, innovative, avant-garde, or adaptive families, pragmatic, as well as parts of precarious and very marginalized groups. And this diversity, I think, it's a very strength of CSA, and this is a way we can bring up different social groups together and learn from one another. And this is a thing which is very relevant for CSA.
Thanks, Veiko. So basically what you're saying is that we are a social movement and part of the food sovereignty movement as well. How do you see this perhaps in the context of the States and New York and the work you've been doing, Kiana?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of just tells one aspect of the story, and maybe in New York in particular, but even in America, maybe some of the origin story. But I think it also, when we frame it that way, it marginalizes the concerted efforts of impacted communities, disenfranchised folks, folks of color, mixed income folks. So I think it tells part of the story, but it's not full. I would say, like in New York, One good example is like for over 25 years, Just Food and the place that I worked at recently, most of our work around food justice was in the cornerstone of the CSA model and program. So not just bringing it and starting to connect farmers to community leaders, but also building out strategies, trainings, and peer-to-peer leadership opportunities for folks to learn how to make CSA more accessible and more affordable. So it looks like sliding scale. It looks like subsidized shares. It looks like bringing SNAP or EBT, like how to make sure that food insecure folks or mixed income folks have an opportunity to leverage government dollars to buy farm fresh food directly from farmers. But it also doesn't speak to the farmer demographic either. A lot of the farmers we're working with are small to mid, as well as working, family farm scale farmers, and mostly farmers, a big number of farmers of color as well.
Kiana, you used two abbreviations there that not everybody knows, maybe. Can you just explain what you mean by SNAP? And I think EBT you said, or something?
Yeah, so EBT stands for Electronic Benefit Transfer, and SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. So it's a government program from the federal government in the US that provides dollars to community folks, food insecure folks that meet a certain income threshold in order to buy food. And so one of the things that Just Food, along with other grassroots groups in years past, helped advocate and build policy to make sure that CSA were eligible to use your EBT card or your EBT benefits there. So it gives the chance for CSA to move from just middle class folks that maybe perhaps started a lot of these sites to increase the opportunity for folks in their community that might be food insecure, housing insecure, money insecure, to still get farm fresh food. So if we bring in more of those models to CSA, which a lot of us have done, it gives the opportunity to increase economic equity as well as racial equity, depending on your demographics.
Very interesting. Ariel, what does it look like in Brazil? Is it very much a middle class thing, or how do things work over there?
I, I think I understand what has been putting, but from a far distance, it may look like just a middle class phenomenon, but many farmers can come to us looking for maybe just an alternative to flow their production, and many consumers came for the first time looking for us just to have access to organics that looking for low prices. But one of the things with my experience here in Brazil is that making part of a CSA really changed the reality, not just of the
Sorry,
farmer, but
I'm going to interrupt you, Ariel. We can't hear you properly. Could you speak closer to the microphone, maybe? I apologize for interrupting.
no, okay. So I
That's
think
great.
okay. I think one of the best things in CSA is just like making part of a CSA, because when CSA really brings another level of understanding of what is a community, and when we look to that, I think we really need to be really diverse, and we have to join the force that was created once by the middle class, maybe like putting forward this movement, but to bring other people together. I think one of the main things after a new consumer is getting a CSA here in Brazil, he or she starts to think, okay, what can I do else, not just to get food to my home and not just to support my farmer, but how can I give a chance to people who cannot afford to buy food to have food, the same food I am eating. So this creates, making part of CSA really creates a feeling of being part of this whole community. So I think from a far distance, it may look like that, but when you're inside, it's totally different.
So really what you're talking about is the social cohesion within the group and building community around the food production and consumption. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes. I think the CSA movement is really strictly linked to the solidarity economic movements everywhere.
Veiko, to come back to you and what you were saying, do you think you could maybe explain a little bit about some of the particularities in Germany and some of the examples of how the social inclusivity works, how the social inclusion actually works in reality, so that farmers, producers are able to make a decent living out of a CSA, and at the same time, different income groups can find a means of accessing what might appear to be too expensive for them at first sight.
Yes, okay. Let me explain the situation here in Germany. One of the crucial points in CSA is to sustain farmers with their business, to produce agricultural products and to deliver to a consumer group. And it's necessary to bring up the budget of a farm to allow for the production and to produce for a year in advance. This is very crucial for farmers to make more independent from markets, to have a perspective for a year, not to feel lost in the market, and this is the possibility to go into a better connection with consumers. And on the other side, we have the very diverse consumer groups with people, marginalized people, richer people or with a higher income. And in Germany, I don't know exactly about the situation in other countries. We have developed some different methods to leverage, to lower the difference between the different income groups. For example, we have a bidding round method, which means that the budget for a year is brought up from the community by different contributions that runs in that way that the whole budget for a year is made transparent from the farm. And then in an anonymous way, every member of the community gives an offer of how much he would like to give to contribute to the budget, and if it's possible to reach out for the budget in the first round, all is great. If it's not enough for the budget, a second round starts, and everybody can voluntarily give what he wants to contribute to the budget, and that allows for different people to give in a way everybody can individually support the production of the farm. There are other methods, for example, a sliding scheme where the contribution to the farm budget is dependent on the income, for example. So one with a lower income contribute with a minimum, and people with a higher income contribute with a maximum or more, which is a more formularized way to contribute.
Just to make sure I understood what you were saying, Veiko, when you talk about the bidding round, how do people do it? Because how do you avoid people getting embarrassed by saying, well, I can't afford to pay so much, or I can afford to pay more? Because I think, people can be uncomfortable with the fact of other people knowing how much they can or can't afford. How do you do that?
It's a voluntary, and in most of the cases, it's an anonymous offer,
Okay.
which are people giving. So it's not clear how much you bring up to the whole community, and I think it's necessary because to say I have not as much money as some other people could be connected to a kind of yes, it's not feeling very good in some kind. So via this anonymous offer, we can make it possible that everybody really can give how much he can or how much he wants to give. And in most of the cases, it runs very, very good. It's interesting how good it runs. That the budget of a farm is in most cases fulfilled. We have also cases that in this way we can build a surplus. So there are other examples that for the surplus of the bidding round is also spent for other social, humanitarian, or other means, for example, to support marginalized people, for example, refugees, or building free shares for people who really don't have any means to support, or other possibilities like investments for the farm. So it's very diverse how we can spend these surplus.
And what happens, for example, if somebody meets a difficult situation during the year? If they start off the year with a job and everything's going fine, and then they lose their job during the year, is there also some kind of a mechanism to ensure there is justice and access and right to food in a case like that?
Yes, we have that. It's very different from CSA to CSA, but we have a lot of examples that people in tragic or circumstances can be supported by the whole community. It's one thing is a mechanism. The other thing, I think, which is much more relevant, is that we build out a real community where people know each other and people want to support each other, so that you get information about the very, very individual situation of people. And if there is a kind of, for example, a death in a family or something other, or you lost your job like that, we have very many cases where the CSA continues to support people by giving them the possibility to get their shares without any contribution.
Kiana, what do some of these things look like in some of the disadvantaged communities around the States? Because, I mean, we all know that the States, there are huge disparities in terms of income, in terms of access to healthy food. And there's perhaps maybe 1 in 4, 1 in 5 in the States actually suffering from hunger at this point. So how does CSA work on that in terms of actual examples of things that you see on the ground? And please, can you speak a little bit more slowly, because there's interpretation and also a lot of non-native speakers here. I know you get carried away and really enthusiastic, but
I'll work on it. I know my New York talk. Yes. So I think what's important, and I'm really glad that we're lifting this up, is speaking about how CSA helps lift up or amplify the dignity as in our food system, as well as the right to food. And I think the strategies look, and sometimes very similar to what Veko is saying in his network we've seen here in America, is strategies like sliding scale, where people who have the opportunity to add more to their base share. So if the farmer sets the price and somebody who has more resources can help offset the cost for somebody who doesn't, it keeps that chain and it keeps that relationship and the opportunity for shares to be subsidized for other folks that wouldn't be able to. I think also the different ways to mitigate or minimize the shame that comes into income is important, and figuring out strategies on how to figure out a way that's feasible for the farm and for the community to make this happen, where you're not ostracizing people or putting them on a weird space in order to figure that out. So I'm really, I've seen it in sliding scale, like in New York often, and have helped groups build in sliding scale or revolving loans. So like Beiko said, like when you have surplus funds, how do you replenish that? And then when people might have to drop off, having a waiting list so other folks in need can continue to connect to that food and it's not wasted. But other like examples that really spoke to me in some of the research that we've been doing around like what's dignity or equity in CSA has been like in DC, there's a group called Dreaming Out Loud where they've connected their CSA to communities in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia, Upper Virginia area that have been not just communities of color, but also mixed income, and making sure that that CSA and that share can get, that farm fresh food can get to folks in that community. Another great example is Mill City Grows in Massachusetts, here in our Northeast. Shout out to Allie Jacobs and her team. They help connect, even in the midst of COVID, 30 refugee families and working with other refugee settlement organizations to help connect those families that were new to the States, not just to a CSA, but to other incentive programs to help them make their food affordable. So they had the access, the knowledge, and the information, and this network, which is really important. So again, we're kind of demystifying this idea that CSA is just for like middle class. And I would say too, like this consistent grassroots fundraising and just that solidarity and camaraderie that people find within their own groups and how to adjust and pivot for the needs of that time. So it's not just pivots or strategic pivots in immediate crisis like COVID, but what we see is the CSA model actually affords the opportunity to build more viable ways to make sure that the farmers' needs are met as well as community needs, and how unique that can be based on that particular site.
Ariel, I read and heard a lot of really interesting things over the last year about CSAs and the small scale food producers movements in Brazil, bringing surplus food into the favelas for free. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that kind of dimension and some of the things going on in Brazil, because I don't think people hear about it.
This is one of the actions that occurred during the pandemic that makes me really proud of it, and mainly moved by MST, which is the Landless Rural Workers Movement here in Brazil. There were many food donations actions. Not just that, but also the rice prices here in Brazil got really high during the pandemic, and the federal government couldn't do anything about that, or really didn't do anything about that. And still, MST kept the prices low. And MST altogether is the biggest rice producer and organic rice producers in South America. So really need to pay attention to that, and also to have in mind that 10% of our CSAs here in Brazil are run by MST farmers. So somehow the CSA movement here are strictly linked to this kind of food donations. And at some places, at some cities, it was really a really powerful thing that for some months or some weeks, people didn't even needed to have any more donations, so they just send it to other communities that weren't on the aim of that. So I think this is a good thing. And just to close my speak now, I think it's CSA para Todos, which is CSA for all. It's an initiative which has been trying to come to life during the pandemic, which is a CSA just to work with people on peripheral sites of São Paulo city, which is the greatest city of South America. So it's a plant new CSA, plant new form of CSA that we are linking social movements, farmer social movements, and also people in the cities to make a CSA. So how can I pay an extra share per month to give some other people access, and how can we give these people in the peripheral sides of town a real economic education of how can they develop that, how can they pay for the food that they get, even if it's a really low income, you know. So hopefully this project will be running in 2021. So I'm really proud of that.
It sounds to me from what you're saying that both Kiana and Ariel, that this is really an alternative to food banks, because food banks have, of course, not only are they based on a structure of industrial agriculture and unhealthy produce, but it also sounds like a much more collective, socialized, not to say socialist, approach. And what you're saying, Veiko, is very much resonates in terms of you get what you need according to the means you have, as opposed to going into a shop and paying a price that is set with many other people benefiting and not necessarily the producer. So how do you see this kind of dimension developing around the world? How do you see us being able to develop more CSAs and putting this forward maybe as a legislative process to support people? What do you think?
I think saying about the Brazilian case, the first thing I think we should do is to somehow have the federal government support to the CONSEAS, which is the Food Security Council. And as I could see from the last years, I think Brazilian legislation about that was one of the top in the world. The way it was institutionalized, organized, from back down, going down to up as well. And they were already, like, it's dismissed now by Bolsonaro government, but still the civil society and other partners are keeping the local councils alive. And one of the main agendas of the councils are the institutional procurements, and on the more recent agenda, the CSA are being really included in this agenda. So I think working together with institutional procurement plus CSA, held by CONSEA, it should be really a policy recommendation for these next years, I think.
So what you're saying is, first of all, the fact that the food policy councils, the Conselho, were dismantled at national level, and they really need to be reinstated, because they were an incredible force in terms of Brazil's national food policy and the right to food as it was developed under Lula's government. But you've also mentioned the question of public procurement. Now, I think this is something that CSA is starting to look at a little bit. Veiko or Kiana, do you have anything you would like to add to the question of the importance of local food policy councils and the importance of public procurement and how CSA can support public procurement?
Do you want to go, Vaco?
I can if you want.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. To make a CSA or adjust food systems more common, it's necessary to go to make it broader. And the one thing is the public procurement for sure, because it's a very big part of food systems, and very relevant because it's easy for politics to go into this part of market. So it's also very necessary because it's the possibility to communicate to a broader public how necessary it is to develop just and healthy food systems. So this is why public procurement is one example we have really to try to step in. The other is a question of democratize our food systems, and that is why food councils are very relevant, because we don't have to let the control over food systems to corporates and governments. It's necessary to set a local power to the people and include very different social groups, social milieus to control the food system. It's a question of food sovereignty, and that is why food councils are very relevant, even if there is a lot to do. Also on the question of the governance of local food councils, because it's not very easy to organize food systems in a very local way. It's not very easy to that civil society can organize that way. It's we have to be clear about that. We don't imaginize that it's very easy. Because market is a very effective working instrument to bring food to the people, and we have to think about how we can organize in a democratic way to bring food to the people and via food council and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Vaco, there's a question that came in asking you if you can put some links to specific CSA projects that use the bidding round, and maybe you can put some links into the comments section for the people who've asked for that.
Sorry, not just now, because I just have to focus on the discussion here, and I must search for the link, so it not yet. Thank
okay,
you.
so maybe you'll find a way of doing that later.
Yeah.
Kiana, what do you think about these questions of local authorities being closer to people and the need for food policy councils and the need for public procurement? And did CSAs step up to the plate when New York kids were not able to get school meals and things like that, for example? Maybe you've got some interesting things to add there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to take a step too, because I think what we see in the U.S. is the opportunities around local food policy councils in different cities and states. But it also depends on the dynamics of the existing grassroots networks and leadership and community leadership in those different states and cities. So I've seen some very vibrant ones, like in states of like Michigan, and working in cities like Detroit and other cities in Michigan. But at the same time, like in New York, it's been a question around local food policy councils, if they would be the best mechanisms to really amplify the grassroots engagement, or there are already existing networks and grassroots groups that do that work, like a Just Food organization that already has existing grassroots solutions, grassroots relationships, direct relationships between farmers and community. And then it doesn't get co-opted by either like tokenized leaders or folks that maybe just have the same clout and then start to speak for other groups without really getting the truth from the ground up. And so that's something that we've been really trying to see in our space, is like, how do we continue to find ways to amplify true grassroots voices, folks from the community, and not just find new ways to consolidate power within other folks or people who say they're speaking for us in the community. But to take aside from that, what I would say, what I saw, not just in the COVID response, what I've seen consistently is that the CSA model is has been an opportunity for folks from the grassroots to really speak up and take leadership on how they want to see food in their community. They've also used it as a launching pad for other ways to connect with farmers, to find different models to support not just farm viability, but community leadership. So it can be the existing model and you're able to bring in new members, but it can also be a collective power tool where you're building power from the ground up through your core group leaders, through your memberships, to really support and advocate for what your community wants and your need and your farmers. But we've also seen how important the backbone organization, capacity building organizations within these grassroots networks that offer technical assistance, that offer training, that offer mini grant opportunities to help groups, farmers do what they do best, community leaders do what they do best, but it doesn't mean that they're losing out on connections to engaging their local state officials or local city officials. So I do think, and what I've seen even more so in these last few times, is not just the power of regional procurement, not just the power of leveraging existing infrastructure that CSA offers in communities, in particular communities that have been under-resourced, but how to bring resources in that will make it feasibly able for these groups to scale up. You can't just, dump money and then expect everybody to do it. There's technical assistance, there's thought leadership, there's peer-to-peer knowledge that should be resourced, that should be supported, and not just in the ways that we're told they could, but where the choices of the community decide how that is. And I think then it really talks to not changing or diluting the direct relationship between farmer and community that is so important in the CSA model, but it's actually lifting up how to leverage the collective power in a solidarity economy with these backbone organizations that help connect them too. So then you're able to advocate for more realistic policy. You're able to increase share size. You're able to support farmers where they're at, and you're able to move in already models that were bringing fresh food that was democratically controlled by those communities in further out into those communities. So not just the affluent communities, not just the existing CSA communities, but even further. So like in New York, I want to see even more CSAs in Brownsville, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx. And we've done that, and we can continue to do that, but there's resources that need to be throughout the chain to make that feasible and happen. It can't just be a pastoral story.
Everything you've been saying really seems to come down to empowerment of communities, empowerment of the producers and the eaters, and not having other people take the decisions for them on their behalf, and really implementing the fundamental principles of social solidarity economy.
Absolutely.
I really hear that very strongly in what you're saying.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add too, I not only find that kind of inspiration from our grassroots community and how we learn from each other in, from local, but also to global. And being a part of a network like Urgency and having the connections to other solidarity-based CSAs and models, like Vaco's work and like the work that Ariel has done has inspired us and continues to find ways to connect us.
Ariel, there's one question that's come in here, which is about developing countries and consumers who may not be so well off, and how do you get access to markets for producers and access to food for those consumers. Now, while Brazil is considered a reasonably well-developed country, a developing country, I don't think that's necessarily true at all in the Amazon. Maybe you can speak to the aspects of the type of community you Amazon and the kind of CSA community you have there, and how the producers and consumers work together, and the access to and right to safe, healthy food for lower income groups in places like the Amazon, at the same time as preserving a decent income for the producers there. Because I would personally say that from what I know, the Amazon is certainly not a developed country.
Yes, sadly, Amazonia is still a British colony, so we still have like 100 years to develop.
Can you speak into your microphone, Ariel? I'm sorry.
I think I got some problem here. Can you hear me? What?
Yeah, speak slowly,
Okay.
clearly, and loud into the mic, please.
Okay. I think CSA has a really great potential for developing areas, and I do see Amazonia as our last frontier on CSA movement here in Brazil. Our first CSA in here will be 3 years old next February, and from that, like many and many other farms in the state of Amazonas, and also local government and other partners are really interested in like spreading up, because we have got many local production. And when we talk about social biodiversity, it doesn't really matter just our activism that goes out of our mouth on our speeches, but also what really feeds us up. So we're really trying to put on our shares unconventional unconventional foods, and also we have a chance to rethink about capitalism and greenwashing in Amazonia, when we have like another universe to like price things, like it's not just a cacao fruit that's on the home yard of a farmer, but that there is a lots of more biodiversity involved and the management of the place. So we really need to think wider, because Amazonia is on the focus of the world, and our frontiers of the uh, conventional farming are like advancing to the center, and really need to like pick people and give them a chance to keep on doing what they were doing for the past millennia, like just planting the forest, literally. So I think that's it. It's a great potential for Amazonia CSA.
And people of all income groups do have access to CSA food in your CSAs in the Amazon.
Yes, partly they have, partly they don't. So really need to see how to work with the food banks and with our exceeding, because there is plenty of exceeding, but we have a really lack of logistics here in Amazonia. Because
So
it's a
matter of working more on the logistics and getting the food to the people who really need it, more than the financials.
Yes, sure.
Okay, I think that's really important to clarify. Time is turning. I'm moderating, but I would also like to say that within the European Union, in the Farm to Fork strategy, and the EU in general, there is increasing recognition of the importance of short food chains and community supported agriculture in particular. And the same is true in terms of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And both Veiko and Kiana, you are members of the civil society mechanism of the Committee on World Food Security. What kind of policy recommendations do you think we could continue to put forward in terms of our fight for the right to food and food justice? How do you see this at all levels?
Kiana, you want?
Sure. I mean, I think what's important is that we continue to demystify this disconnect between supporting farm viability and equity. And equity really is not just economic, but it can be racial and environmental as well. And I think we also need to continue to value and support feasibly smallholder farms, and not just seeing them as just like one-off or outlier opportunities or solutions, but they together can really build a collective power, grow to scale, work to scale to meet certain needs. So legislation that really speaks to genuinely supporting solidarity-based initiatives and models, providing resources, refining policies that are already existing that truly support smallholder farms, that truly support CSA groups, and again, the backbone organizations that really help provide capacity to all of these efforts. I think we could improve it so it's easier for these groups to apply for resources and to be seen as policy, to inform the policies. So I think the work that we've done in the civil society really helps continue to find ways to amplify the experiences and work on the ground to the higher levels when we start working and doing policy work. But it really should, in terms of improved policy, like putting money into the infrastructure that is already existing within these models so they can leverage their scale and the work that they do. And divest or increase investment of technical assistance. So folks that we're not just building consistent demand for farmers, but we're also building strong leaders to be able to keep these models going. So these are not just one-off or immediate band-aids or solutions, oftentimes that we see in emergency models or mutual aid efforts because they're working on just free labor or donations, but we're actually supporting money to go to infrastructure pivots for these groups, like when COVID happened, safety protocols, safety equipment. So we're just leveraging existing models and connections so these groups can continue to scale up feasibly and do the work, increase the access, but and use the money where they can in order to extend their agricultural production and increase their portfolios to how they're getting food to other groups.
And Ariel, you already said you would like to see the food policy councils come back and become a central pivot in the whole legislative approach in Brazil. Am I correct?
Yes, I think that's one thing. Maybe just to add what could be done beyond that is to work together with the National Company of Food Supplies, because they're really open and they have really big problems that they are coming to more and more to the CSA movement here to help them somehow, giving our white letter to do what our knowledge and our feeling can promote to get better the agri-food system.
One thing I would like to add myself is that FAO has recognized the 10 elements of agroecology. Now, agroecology is really I believe the answer to what we are trying to do, it includes as one of those 10 elements, solidarity economy. That is reflected in Germany in what you call CSA, it's Solidarische Landwirtschaft, so solidarity agriculture, by very definition in Germany, is a part of this agroecological collective solidarity between producers and consumers, between consumers and consumers, and producers. It works at all levels. And this to me is how we can achieve the economic and social change. Because what we're talking about when we talk about food justice, I believe we cannot talk about food justice without talking about societal change and shift away from the neoliberal system, shift to an agroecological society. So, final question for all three of you before we wrap up is, what lessons have we as a network learned? What lessons have you in your countries learned? And how can we continue taking this forward in terms of our struggle to ensure the right to food and food justice in all our countries and around the world? Just to wrap up what you've been saying and take it a step further.
Okay, just shortly to step into the side. CSA is a learning process. I think this is relevant. We also have to go on with this message. So it's not. It's also on an international level. We have to learn from one another and make global justice a practical approach. I think that's it. I think we also have to recognize our strength is our diversity. We have very, very different social groups, milieux who are coming together. This is relevant. And third point, I think, to make it short, we can also learn from civil society mechanism, because we have very different constituencies which have a power to speak within that. We have to learn from that to bring it to other political levels, for example, the European level or also national levels. Just up to local levels, and to build up food councils on the principle of different constituencies to encompass every social group and every social milieu.
Yeah, I would just add is that, that we're continuing to see, and I hope that this session continues to push forward, is that solidarity economy and solidarity-based models are not a theory. It's not elite concepts, but these actually are models that offer and build community-driven solutions that are unique to our experience, but also build collective power in order to support a better future for all of us at all scales. And when we kind of work together, we're able to move that in civil society mechanisms to really inform the work on the ground as well as policy. And that food is not just the food that we consume, that food can really be a driver for transformative change. And that cultural relevancy in food, food and environmental stewardship of land, and equity in all forms are not mutually exclusive. And these are just practical models that make it happen now in order to build alternative economies for the future.
Nice. I think as a learning question, I think agriculture is the base of every culture, and CSA has works just with agriculture. But more time I see, and I see more people link it to solidarity economy. We should really bring the examples that we have for these economic models applied to agriculture and agroecology to other sides of our economy and our society, like education, such as community-supported schools or community-supported hospitals, and go on. And speaking for my network, I think this is what we would like to see in the future.
Thanks a lot. Just one or two of the questions that I've seen. One is, are there alternatives to solidarity payment aside from bidding and sliding scale? I don't think anybody mentioned contributing by working on the farm, which is another one that exists. Another question that I saw is about the vegan question. Now, obviously, you have some CSAs that are only vegetables, others that are dairy, that include dairy. Some contracts include meat, others don't. We also have community supported fisheries. But I really think it's possible to have access to just fruit and vegetables that are totally coherent with vegan principles. I would like to say that we do need animals for their manure in the whole process. And this is something that always needs to be borne in mind, that the vegan concept needs to take into account to some extent that animals are a necessary part of a circular economy on the majority of farms. In terms of other means of payment, do any of you have anything you can just add in there?
Yeah, I would just quickly lift up again revolving loan funds, and as well as government funding and philanthropy money going to the existing networks of CSAs. I mean, I think ultimately what folks are trying to do, or what these strategies do, is how to make the share accessible and affordable to community members, not to the detriment of the farmer. The farmer should get the price that they need in order to grow well, in order to be, to pay farm workers well, and to be able to manage like the land. We can't like compromise farmers in order to meet, another price. So I think if there's other ways to bring in funding that support both the share price, the farmer, and the community group, then that's ultimately the key of a lot of these strategies we're talking about.
Thanks, Kiana. I think that's very relevant, and also things like paying a share forward for somebody else who can't afford to pay it. We're into our last minute here, so I would really like to sum all of this up by saying I have an overwhelming impression of a huge movement of food sovereignty, equity, food justice linked to an approach of social and solidarity economy that is genuinely part of the agroecology movement, and that we are talking about system change. We are not talking about selective few having access to the best, but really ensuring that there is social, economic, and food justice for all. So Veiko, Kiana, and Ariel, it's really been a great time. Thank you very much. Thank you to the interpreters and to all the Oxford team who've been working behind the scenes to make this into such an exciting session.